Hello, everyone. Yes, I am live. I am here. I am virtually joining you from across the other side of the world in Australia. So, today we're going to talk about powering up with the Power Platform. My name is Heidi Hasting. A little bit about me, I am a senior consultant with a company here in Australia called Expose. I do a lot of business intelligence, but I have a past life as a software developer. Love all things application lifecycle management, database lifecycle management. I'm a regular attendee at tech events all over the world, both in person and hybrid and virtual. SQLBits is one I haven't attended in person, but I'm so excited because I can see the room from my home here in Australia, and it's awesome that you could all attend. I hope you're having a really good SQLBits. It's an event I hope to see in person. I'm in the middle, down the bottom in South Australia, so I'm not near the Great Barrier Reef or the Sydney Opera House, so that's a little bit of context of where I am. Today, we're going to talk all about the Power Platform integrations. So we're going to do things like Power BI with Power Apps. We're going to do Power Apps with Power BI and Power Automate, Power Automate with Power BI, Teams and Power BI and PowerPoint. And there's so many more, but that's what we're going to talk about. And we're going to look at that in terms of business cases we can achieve using those integrations. So first, we need to know, what is the Power Platform? It's Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agent, Dataverse, and we're also going to talk about some other products. But before I talk about those, let's talk about what the context is. So Power BI is all about visualizing the data, making it pretty, bringing it to life, and answering those business questions. Power Apps is the solution they use, the low code, no code for data entry. It's about how you get that data, how you capture it, and a way you can do that. Power Automate is all about workflows and process automation. So think about, tasks where you do repeatedly, like taking a data set, taking a screenshot of your report, sending it in an email to someone, or taking a value and increasing that by 10% when the boss asks. With Power Virtual Agent, we're not going to cover, but think about that as your chatbot, and Dataverse is your data storage, kind of like a database behind your Power Apps if you choose to use Dataverse. You don't have to use Dataverse for Power Apps, but that's the context of it. Some other products we're going to look at today is Teams and PowerPoint. So they're not part of the Power Platform, but they're products we're going to look at. So I'm going to take you on a journey. This is a journey that I've experienced in my life, and a journey I put together for this demos, and I wanted to share it with you. So we're going to start in Power BI. We're going to be looking at our executive reporting for sales. Then the question comes up from my boss. My lovely boss says, that's great, but I want to see my monthly targets too. How are we going to do that? We're going to look at Power Apps. Then we think, okay, but what if I want to simulate increasing my monthly targets by 10%? How can we do that? How can you make my life easier? Power Automate, of course. And then, I'm busy. Well, my boss is busy. I'm also busy, but I'm busy. Can you just send me that as a screenshot every month? Like, these are the months I need. Just send me some screenshots of it. So we're also going to look at Power Automate for that. Then we go, let's collaborate. Let's talk about this. Let's introduce Teams to the conversation. But then let's take that board meeting to the next level and use PowerPoint. All with me so far? I can see you, by the way. So if you're nodding, I can see you. And apologies, my camera is here, but you're over here and my presentation's down here. So you'll see me looking in different spots based on the where we're at. So we talked about our journey. Let's see what that executive reporting in sales looks like. So here's my executive sales report. So you can see on this report, we've got, our sales month by fiscal year, and then we look here and we can see our sales amount by the order date. And if I zoom that in, because it's probably really little on your screen, we can put that in focus mode and we can see here and hover over things and go, okay, these are my sales. But remember how my boss was like, that's really great, but I want to see monthly targets. So I can see sales, but I can't see targets on this report. And by the way, all my demos will be publicly available data sets or sample reports that I've used, because I wanted you to be able to do the same thing. So this particular report is actually, I think, one Jay built and is available in the GitHub repo for Microsoft. So now we want to introduce those monthly targets. So the monthly targets, we're going to look at using Power Apps for it. So how do we do Power Apps with Power BI, right? This is our Power BI desktop file. You can see that by the little Power BI desktop up the top. Oh, it's going to authenticate. And then you'll notice here on the right, you'll see the Power Apps icon. Now that may be really little on the giant screen. So you're going to see in the visuals pane a Power Apps icon. When we add that to our report canvas, we get the ability to integrate Power Apps with Power BI. But the first thing you're going to want to do is configure it. So just dropping it on the canvas kind of does nothing. We then have our configuration steps. So the first thing you do is you add the fields. Now, these are the fields from your Power BI report that you want Power Apps to be aware of. So you drag and drop your fields from the field pane into the Power App field well. So you can see that Power Apps data in that middle screenshot there. One thing to be really mindful of though is Power Apps has multiple options itself. It has a Canvas app, it has model-driven apps, and then Power Apps portal. In this case, we're only talking about Canvas apps for the integration. You can't just drop a model-driven app inside Power BI. So just be conscious of that. Also because the Power App Canvas app requires a bit more development effort. Once we've picked our fields, we then choose whether we want to use an existing app or create a new one. From there, dive on into the Power App Studio. Now, I'm not going to show you exactly how I built this Power App, and yes, it does look ugly, but it's good for the purposes of this demo. But it's a little Canvas app where we show the month key and we show the target. Now, the month key behind the card little pop-up is actually going to show a label, which is the month key value. Now, that's coming from the Power BI integration side of things. And then the target is where I'm going to take data entry and allow the user to enter a target, and then I'm going to store it in a backend. Now, in this particular app, my storage backend is not an Excel file, and I'll tell you why. The reason I initially did this with an Excel file, but what I found is if you put an Excel file behind a Power App and integrate it with Power BI, that works, no problem. However, the visuals don't automatically refresh, even if you refresh the visual, because the Power BI visual back to an Excel data source is on a scheduled refresh cycle. Whereas I wanted it to be more instantaneous. I thought that was a bit more of a cool effect. So this Power App is actually talking to an Azure SQL database, and the Power BI report is pulling from the same Azure SQL database. So we can get instantaneous responses back. And you'll see on the left here where it says Power BI integration in that tree view, that's where we can pick the fields that we told Power BI to send to the Power App. That's how we can then tell Power Apps to work back with the Power BI report. So what fields it can see, what fields it can filter by, what it can view, what it can show in labels. But also because Power Apps behind that submit button, what's happening is it's saying, hey, take the target, send it to the Azure SQL database for this month key. At the same time, once you've done that and it's all sweet, go and refresh the Power BI dataset. And we do that using the Power BI integration and functions around refreshing. So this particular app is going to update the value and refresh the report, which is pretty cool. So now that I've built my little baby Power App, I save it, I publish it, and I share it. It's important to share it. And then in this case, I'm using a premium connector, so be aware of licensing considerations. I'm not going to delve into licensing because that's a whole session in itself, but be mindful of what connectors you're using in your app. So back in Power BI Desktop now, you can see my app has now surfaced in the report. So we can save that report and publish it up to Power BI Service. Now inside Power BI Service, this is what the user is going to see. And so I can go in and have a look here. I've introduced my targets into the report. So I can click on a target and go, hey, this target's a bit low, 7,500 when they were making sort of 5,000 sales. Let's increase that up. Now, let me just make sure I picked this right because I'm pretty sure this is 5 million, not 5,000. But let's just do a fictitious value and I can say save. Now you see how that moved just ever so slightly. Let's add another 0 to make it a bit more obvious. What's happening is the Power App writing back to the Azure SQL and refreshing. So you see instantaneous feedback on the visuals. So that's how you can integrate your Power App inside Power BI. Super cool. So you see that in bigger view there. See how that jumped? Super cool. And if I pick a different value, I pick here, say, this target, I can go change that one. Go, 9 million's a bit high. Let's drop that down. Let's go 8. That's it. And we bring it back down. So you think about that from a business user perspective, suddenly I can be doing those what if scenarios, that forecasting trend lining and saying, I just want to change this point. Now I've specifically built it to only take the first month key value and update it. So if you picked multiple series points, you would have to change your Power App design to maybe a gallery design where you can edit multiple attributes and publish back with patching and then save. But that's something we can do. So the scenarios where you look at this integration are those write back scenarios, potentially adding comments like a feedback against your report saying, yeah, this report was valuable, I like it. Or think financial reporting where you've got general ledgers and someone needs to explain, hey, why is our budget, way off our target, our like actuals value, or hey, this is our actuals value, this is the forecast we want to do for the next couple of months. The other obvious point for Power Apps is any data entry scenario where you don't already have an existing source system to capture it. If I already have my monthly target somewhere, I would just bring in that data. There's no point in building Power App. But because I don't, it's an opportunity for me to do it. And I can put that Power App against things like Excel, SharePoint list, Dataverse. You just got to consider if you want that automated refresh integration, you have to use something that's got live connectivity. And of course, the what if scenario. Now we're going to take a slight detour because now that we've seen Power Apps, we want to see what else we can do in Power Apps, yeah? So if we started from the other side and we started with building our app to capture some data for our organization, that could be our app team, it could be us, it could be a business user somewhere, and we go, yeah, this is cool, we got an app, but our visual capability is really not so fabulous. Like we want to look at some trending over time. I want to see inventory stock levels. Now we're going to look at what it looks like. So this is a model-driven Power App. So that's why it looks slightly different to that Canvas app. But in the model-driven app, you got this inbuilt charting, but it's really basic. It's a bit on the average side. So how can we make that a little bit more flashy? We got Power BI. Power BI can integrate with Power Apps. So we look at the two scenarios we might have. We might have a Power App where we just want to visualize the data that that app is capturing in a Power BI report, or we want to embed Power BI back in Power Apps. So the first one about visualizing that Power Apps data, I've got my model-driven app. I'm capturing data. This is an example one. This is the Innovation Challenge one. You'll see in the little ribbon up the top, visualize this view. And I hope this is visible to all you. Apologies if it's not. You can see this, visualize this view. If you don't see that in your tenant, go talk to your tenant admin. They've probably disabled the option. That's entirely possible to do. Or if you're in an org and you don't want people to do that, disable the option. But if you do have it, you can now visualize this view of the model-driven app data, and you can do more sophisticated reporting. So Power BI likes to be helpful for you, kind of like the whole Copilot scenario going on, and it says, let me generate some insights for you. And look at that. I've now got a Power BI report off my Power View data, and I didn't even have to do anything but click one button, maybe two or three to get to this state, but I now have a report and I can go ahead and save that and publish it up to the service and have that as a readily available report. The other option we have is to do Power BI embedded inside Power Apps. Now, I should clarify, not Power BI embedded like Power BI embedded the product, more embed a Power BI dashboard tile inside a Power App. You can only do it with a tile, which as soon as you see the tile settings, you know straight away you can only do it with a dashboard. So if you have dashboards in Power BI Service, you can then introduce them as visuals inside Power Apps. So you pick your tile, you pick your dashboard, and then straight away I can see that. So think about that where you've got, say, something like a field engineer who's out in the field, they got the Power App, they're entering data, but they might want to see, hey, what's our stock level for this particular item? Or do we have parts in the warehouse for this? You might want to know what site locations they are, do a bit of a geospatial looking representation. You know, it's giving that user that single pane of glass. They don't have to switch to another reporting platform, or they don't have to go out and log into Power BI or open the Power BI app. You've got that, but you are restricted to dashboard tiles. You can also, if you're in a model-driven app and you're looking at the data, you've got expanded options for visualization. So next on our journey, now that we've gone on a little detour, let's come on back and we've got the boss saying, great, I now got my monthly targets, really love it. I just want to automatically increase all those monthly targets by 10%. Can you do something for me on that? As a matter of fact, we can. So just like we did Power Apps, think Groundhog Day here, Power Automate also has a visual. So if you select the Power Automate visual, so we're back in Power BI Desktop, we pick the visual, we put that onto the canvas. So I'm going to introduce that on, and now I've got options to say, what is the Power Automate workflow you want to run? What are the data fields you want it to be aware of? So we go in and we say, edit this visual, and we're going to go in and configure it. So now we're looking at the Power Automate screen. So if you've ever gone to make.powerautomate.com and you create flows, this is sort of what you'd see, but you're just seeing it inside Power BI Desktop. So I go in and create my flow. I want to do an action to say, when a button is clicked on Power BI, then go execute something. And in this case, I'm going to execute a SQL query against my Azure SQL database that's going to increase the target. Now, this is by 10%, but I'm fairly certain I probably put that at about 50%, so the demo looks a bit more dramatic. But basically, when I click that button, it's going to go update some records and then it's going to refresh the data set, a bit like our Power Apps did. So we're going to automatically see the response to that. Now, if we look at that holistically, these are what the steps are in the flow. So you can see when a button's clicked, that's going to trigger the flow. The flow is going to execute some SQL. That SQL is going to finish. Then it's going to go back to Power BI and refresh the data set. Like before, we save the flow, we apply it, and we share the flow. And now inside our Power BI report, we've got this button to be able to add 10%. So we can see roughly what the figures are now. And if we click that, it's going to trigger, it's going to go call the flow, and then it's going to change it. Now, this happened to me last time I looked at this demo where it would not actually update the value. So I'm going to quickly jump over to Power Automate on my other screen and come back here and drag it over here. And hopefully you can see the same thing. We'll zoom in a bit so you can see it. So this is over in Power Automate. What you'll see here is this is my Power Automate flow here. That's going to add the 10%. And I can see a 28-day run history. The reason I want to show you that is so you can see whether a flow has run or not run. So this gives you that audit history. So if you ever have issues with your integrations, you can go to the respective administrative IDE tools and look at the debugging area there. So I can look and see, okay, this ran March 17th, 7:45 p.m. That's 7:45 p.m. over here. I think it's like 9:30ish in the UK. So you can see here, this actually ran and succeeded, but it took pretty quickly. And if I click into that, I can actually go through and step through each step and see what values it got and how it went. I think something's a little bit amiss there because it should have actually increased that. I'll just run it again just for good measure. So you can see it triggers it, ran it. It should have come back and automated this visual just to make sure it's not a refresh issue. There we go. So now we can see that those targets are changing. So straight away, you can see how you can use that button integration to call a flow. Now, my flow is just adding 10%, but you might do other things like send an email to the team to say, hey, I've reviewed this report and it's all good to go. That button might automatically do those actions. So you think about anything that's repeatable, automatable workflow series, that's where Power Automate is going to be your friend. And like I showed you just then, you can go in and manage the Power Automate. So you can manage it separately. You can go in and make some changes, add more functionality, look at the debug run history, or you can introduce extra functionality in there about auditing. You might send multiple emails, you might have a trigger and go in and debug how you're running things. So that gives you some options there. I should pause in case anyone's got questions. Feel free to submit them on a Canopy app and the moderator will let me know and then I can try and address them. But hopefully you're all following along so far and getting some insights into what you can do. Now that we've done the whole Power Automate to add 10%, we got the boss who's super busy, and this has actually happened to me where I've had a user who has access to the report in the service. They could run the report, but they choose to log a request that says, hey, can you just give me screenshots for these particular months? And I need to put it in the executive's briefing folder, and they'll look at it overnight. Like they literally print it out and look at it overnight. So I thought about that and thought, that's really not a great use of a human's time to sit there and take screenshots and send it or put it in a Word doc and send it over to an executive. Hey, I saw a demo. We can use Power Automate. That's right, we can. Power Automate has a lot of options when it comes to interfacing with Power BI. The really, really big gotcha here is there's nowhere on this screen that it tells me which ones need premium and which ones don't. And when I say premium in this instance, it's premium capacity on the Power BI side. Very expensive to do demos from too. I can tell you some tricks about that. Use the Azure embedded SKU if you need a premium capacity to do some demos or try stuff out because that'll give you a premium capacity that you can work through. So in my case, I would pick an action down the bottom here, which is export to file for Power BI reports, because that's going to do the same thing as me loading a report, saying file, export, save it as a picture, put it in a document. So I'm going to choose that option, but I'm going to incorporate it into a flow. So I'm going to show you the end state first so you can get a bit of an idea of what's happening. So you remember my boss wanted a couple of months worth of data. They're going to give me a data set, probably via email that says, hey, these are the months I want. I'm going to take that data set and put it in an Excel file so that I can have my Power Automate just go pick up that data set. So then when we look here, this next thing is my spreadsheet. So that first column, that fiscal year, that's my boss giving me the values they want. But then how am I going to use those values and filter the Power BI report to only show those values and then export it? I'm going to use the URL filtering capability within Power BI Service. So if you've ever looked at Power BI Service, you can actually put URL filters on the end of the URL. What does that mean? What that means is if you know the field name, so in my case, it's fiscal year with a space, hence why it's got the X0020 here. If I say that equals FY 2018, that's going to filter the fiscal year value in my model to FY 2018 value. Now, if I put that on the end of the URL in the browser in service, that's what it'll do. I think you got to put the question mark first. Question mark, field name, value. And then that's going to filter it. So I now use the URL filtering and I take that in conjunction with the values they've sent me. And then I want to specify the file name because I actually want the file name to automatically have the extension in it being PDF. And that's where I'm going to put that record of data. So I've got my entry points. These are my values to work from. This is what I'm going to automate from. So then back over in the Power Automate, we're going to say it's manually triggered. It's automated to a point, but I'm going to manually trigger it when my boss says, these are the things I want. I update my spreadsheet, put it in. Those other two columns are just calculated expressions. And then once I've done that, I can manually trigger this flow. This flow is then going to go to my data, which is sitting in SharePoint. I'm going to go to SharePoint / OneDrive because it's backed by OneDrive. I'm going to configure it to say, go get me the SharePoint file. And in that file, get me the contents of table 1. Once it has the contents of table 1, so this is what it's doing in this step, I'm then going to do a for each loop on that. So for each value it gets outputted from the list of rows in my file, for each row I want to take the value. So this value field is the output of the previous step, but it's a singular row because I'm doing a loop. And then for each of those values, go call the export file for a Power BI report, export it to file. And this is the workspace I want you to use, the report I want to use, and the format I want to use. So you could change that to something else. I've done PDF, you could do image. So I'm going to say export this report with these values. But the key thing here is the report level filter option. That's what's going to filter it to the specific fiscal year value they told me about. That is doing the same thing I would have done in service by putting it in the URL. It's not exactly doing the same thing as me clicking the slicer or changing the filter pane value. And I'll tell you about that shortly, but this is going to filter that report so that I can go export it. After the export, I'm going to send an email. So now I've got all these options about sending an email. So I'm going to send an email to my colleague, Tim. I'm going to say, hey, Tim, this is my demo. This is the fiscal year. Now that fiscal year is coming from my Excel list. So I can do expressions that take values from outputs of the previous steps. So Power Automate is very cool in that you can use outputs from previous steps as expressions in other steps. So in this case, I'm going to send my email to say, hey, this is the report for this fiscal year. Attached is the fiscal year. This is when I ran it, so I can see the date and time when the flow ran. And then for the attachment name, you want to include the name with the extension. I made the mistake of not putting PDF in my file name. That disaster. Made sure I put my extension in there. And then the attachment context is going to be the output of the Power BI action, which is exporting the report. And now this is what my colleague Tim gets. So my colleague Tim gets a nice little email with the attachment for FY 2018. And then it says, hey, Tim, this is FY 2018. This is when the Power Automate flow ran. So straight away, if they see that and there's any issues, they can say, hey, Heidi, there's an issue with this run you did for me a couple of months back. Then I can go to Power Automate as long as it's in the last 28 days, and I can see exactly what Power Automate tried to do and exactly what it sent to Tim. But the big gotcha here when you're looking at this, and for those astute people in the room have probably spotted it already, this is financial year 2018. Why does the slicer show 2020? This is actually the 2018 data. The reason is it's doing that URL filtering. It's not actually a user going in and picking a slicer value. So the slicer still shows the default value, but this is actually the 2018 figures. So that's why I made sure my email specifically says, this is the fiscal year I'm running for. And the attachment specifically says that, because if they just look at the picture of the report, they're going to get mistaken thinking it's 2020. It's not, it's 2018. So that's something to be really aware of when you're using these export options with the URL filtering. And by the way, if you're seeing a pop-up appear in the middle of the screen, that's because it's authenticating some of these visuals going on. The other thing to be aware of, lots of fun. I had a lot of fun sending the emails. And then I thought to myself, if this thing can send emails, what else can it do? Because Teams allows emails if you're using things like channels. So I was like, hey, I could just send this report straight to a Teams channel. I don't even have to send it to the person and then they have to put it in a Word doc or anything. I just drop it in a Teams channel. All right. Oh, I hope that authentication little window goes away. Still popping up. So the use cases we've got now, so this is Power BI and Power Automate together. So you can see that we're talking about things like bulk updating data. I want to go in and add my 10% to everything or my 50% on my targets. I want to send notifications. I might want to send an email to someone to say, hey, report's ready, go have a look, or send it to teams to go, hey, team, good work, job's done. Or it might be a formal report that we send out once a month that we just go in and someone vets it. And then once it's ready, they send the notification. May have to see what's going on with that authentication screen, but we'll keep trucking along. The other thing we can do the exports, anytime you've got to manually export something, if you can do it on a repeated pattern, that's where Power Automate is great. That's what it's for. It's for workflow automation. And the really cool scenario I've not done in real life, but I've seen it in demos and I want to do it myself, is Power BI administration. So if you think about those times where someone sends you that request that says, hey, I'd like access to this workspace, please. And you go, who are you? Are you authorized? What access do you need? And then you're doing all that manual intervention work to go, let's get all the information. And then we go, okay, now I know the user, the workspace, and the access. Let's go into Power BI service, add the user with the workspace with the access. Think about that in terms of how we could automate it. Let's say we do a Microsoft form that says, hey, tell me which workspace you want, tell me what access level you want as like a choice picker. And then that goes off and gets approval. Then you can go trigger a Power Automate that says, hey, I've got all this data to work with. Go call the Power BI administration APIs and give the user access. And then while you're at it, go log that we did that access request to some sort of system so that when you get audited by security, you can tell them, yeah, the automation gave this user access on this day and here's who approved it. So I love the fact that Power Automate can do all these things that we might do manually now, and also the fact that we can have that audit logging and traceability. But on top of that, that Power BI makes available APIs to allow us to do all this automation, which is super cool. Now, back to our journey, because we are on a lovely journey. On this journey, we're now looking to collaborate. So we've got all our integrations in place. That's really cool. Now we want to talk about this report between, either between myself and my boss or between myself and other report developers. So what are our options there? Options are all sorts, but let's talk about the one that uses Teams, shall we? So with Teams and Power BI or Power BI and Teams, the first thing to be aware of is licensing. It does need Pro and Premium per user or premium capacity the last time I checked. I should point out some of this has changed since I built some of these demos, but this one, be aware of licensing considerations. Then you've got 3 different scenarios that you can use because it's quite broad. So you can do the Power BI app, you can do the Power BI as a tab, and you can do the cards. I'll show you what cards are specifically because you're possibly thinking the card visual in Power BI. No, the card in Teams. So let's go and look at that first scenario. The first one we can look at is Power BI as an app. So if you've seen Teams, this is Teams. Oh, I should have pointed out in that last slide. When I was talking about licensing, I don't know the difference between the Teams, the new premium Teams. So that's why I said it was Power BI. When you come into Power BI, you can add it as an app. So in that left-hand navigation menu, you've got the ability to add apps. So here you can select Power BI and that's going to add it to the left-hand menu as an app. What does that give you? Gives you Power BI service inside Teams. So you're not having to leave Teams, open a browser, log in or single sign in, and then go look at your workspaces, your reports and apps. You can do it all inside Teams. And because Teams is already authenticated, it just loads. Really, really cool. The other thing with it is because it is installing an app on the Teams, if you want to use that for all your users as a default behavior, you can go to your Teams administrators and say, hey, can you install this as a default application? Because I want everyone in the org to just have it. It's just there. And then you look at that and go, now, what are the scenarios I can do? So one of the scenarios I do with this one is pilots. Pilots where you got brand new users to Power BI, because teaching a user to do sign on to Power BI sounds easy, but then you introduce things like 2-factor authentication and hello, time complexity explaining to users. So you can go in here and use Teams. If they've already got Teams, you can introduce your reporting in Power BI into Teams. And then when you're talking through your new users, you can be talking them through, using the Power BI and Teams, so you're not having to teach them the login experience just yet. You're just using it as a way to get around using the login. I like it for pilots, love it for pilots. Also love it because I'm in Teams for a lot of other things, so I can just go in and look at reports, or if someone's got an issue with a report, I can go in and have a look at it here. I don't have to automatically go load up another browser tab. You can view your workspaces, you can view your apps and your reports. You can also create and edit because it is just service inside Teams. So you can see here, this looks like Power BI service creating a report, but I can see the surrounding area. I'm still inside Teams. So you got that single view of glass. The next option we've got is Power BI as a tab. Now, Power BI as a tab, really powerful. Think about when you're working with a fellow developer and you want to collaborate on a report, you can just add the tab to the chat conversation you're having with them. So you're chatting away about changing some reports or something, rather than have to load another browser and look at it, you can just have it as a tab and go, hey, have a look at the reports just in the tab here. Just check it out. Let me know if you want any changes, and then you can always remove the tab later. Or if you're doing some pilot work with a group of users, you can add those users to a team, put a channel in that says, pilot, drop the tabs in there and say, hey, go look at the latest release we did. And they can look at it because they don't know exactly where that tab's going. So you can introduce, V1, V2, V3, and just be cycling it while you're working away. And also because it's sitting inside Teams, you can chat about it. So if we go in and hit add up the top where we've got the different tabs, we pick Power BI because that's what we want to add. But now you get extra features that you didn't see in the app because the app was just introducing service as a whole. But when you're adding as a tab, you're not exactly going to introduce the whole service as a tab. I mean, you can put the URL and do a web link. But in this case, I want a specific report or workspace app. So I might use the workspaces where I want to display a prototype proof of concept report or a specific executive report to say, hey, the report's ready, have a look, what do you think? Or I might use the app if I want to see what the experience is like from the user's perspective. If I'm going to publish everything out as an app, then I'm going to use the app in the tab. I'm not going to use the workspace in the tab because then the users aren't going to see anything because they won't have access. Once I've navigated to whether I want workspace or app, I go into the specific workspace or app name and then pick the report within that. That's then going to say, hey, now that you've picked what you want, do you want me to post a message about that into the channel? So when you're talking to someone, if you can silently add the tab, you can untick the option to post a message right down the bottom and say, you know what, just add the tab. I don't want anyone to know about the tab just yet. Or I've been talking to my colleague about this the whole time. I don't need an extra message in the posts. But if you're doing it as a pilot, you can add it and you can post to the channel about it. So what that's going to do is automatically put a message here to say, hey, Heidi's gone and added the customer profitability sample as a tab. And you can navigate to the tab via the button, or you can just click the tab up the top. And once they do click that tab, you can see the Power BI report is sitting inside Teams. I can see the filter pane like I would if I made the filter pane available inside Service. I can see the whole report, and this is all interactive. This is a screenshot here, but imagine if I'm clicking away, it would interact the same way it would on Service. So that's really important that you can still get that same feature richness. So I can still export, I can still print, I can still do all sorts of things, subscribe, edit, email. I can change the filters, I can view the filters, all the things you can do inside Service, you can do inside Teams as a tab. The other thing I can do is chat. Now, one thing that people don't realize when they're doing chat for the first, one or two times, that chat is not like it's not visible to everyone. It's visible to everyone who has that tab and that report. So when you are using the chat features, just be really conscious, you're starting to do a chat conversation. That's great. Scorecard looks good for this month. Thanks, team. If you put something where you've got row level security and only a few people in that wider group can see it and you start talking about it in the chat, they're not going to know what you're talking about. Or if you start putting values, those are potential values they can't see because the row level security restricts them. So just be conscious when you are using the chat. That chat's visible to all your user base. So it's not just you and whomever specifically can see that data point. It's everyone who gets to this tab. They can see the chat. So just be aware of that. Make sure you're using chat. Or you might want to disable chat because you don't want people to use it. Either two. The other thing is cards. So this is an example of me doing a chat to myself. I've just dropped a URL into Teams. Looks great. Customer profitability sample hyperlink. Where is that report? I don't particularly want to click the link to go find out. I can click it and go see it. That would be fine. But it would be nice if there was a bit more information about what the heck is this link someone's just dropped. I don't even know that that's Power BI other than the fact that they left the Power BI in the text. So a link is handy, but it could be better. Like, what if I could see the workspace? What about the actual report name in case someone's changed the link there? That's where cards come in. So this is a card. So you can see it's a bit more feature rich here. So if you take a report URL now, it's not available for everything. So don't try dropping app links in there or data flow links or anything like that. This is really only works with reports. So it's not super awesome, but still something better than nothing. If you go to a report, grab the URL out of Power BI service, go chuck that into Teams in the posts, give it a few minutes, and then you'll notice the card will appear. Now the card gives us the breadcrumbs. So now I know that this report is coming from a workspace called Power BI Preview Feature Check, and it's the customer profitability sample. So it gives me that breadcrumb information. It's much more informative to do that to my colleagues, to give them a URL that tells them what workspace I'm talking about and what report, and then they can go and take action. They can go and open that, or they can just leave it sitting in the post. But it's much more helpful to be able to use that. And all I had to do was copy the URL from service and drop it into the chat in Teams, and it automatically put a nice feature-rich card. So it's one of those cool moments where you just drop that in and you go, ooh, all the information's there. So now your colleague's not going to turn around and go, were you looking at the UIT version or were you looking at the prod version? Like, I'm not sure which workspace. And of course, you can click it and find it out from looking at service, but it's nice to see it here. I should click there, then you can see it highlighted. The other one's sharing in Teams. So from Power BI, you have the ability to share. So up in the ribbon, up in the top menu, you would see share. If you share, it's not as feature rich, but it's still something to be aware of. It's another way to integrate Power BI with Teams. So if I hit share, that's going to bring me up an option to say, hey, what sort of thing do you want to do? And I say I want it to go to Teams. From Teams, I then have to authenticate because it needs to know what Teams I'm talking to. So I log into my Teams and then it says, hey, where do you want to share it to? Do you want to go to a specific group or a channel or a particular user that you want to talk to? But notice here, it's not the most friendly thing because I've now hit the share button and I just get this giant URL. This is like reading a GUID for data people. I can interpret that to a point, like I know it's going to an app report and a specific report there in amongst all the different percents and numbers. But it would be nicer to use the card. So just be aware if someone is using share, this is what the experience they're going to get. So it might be better to just, instead of hitting that share button, just copy the URL, go back into Teams and hit paste. But it is something to be aware of. It's another way that Power BI and Teams coexist. So some of the use cases which I would consider using Teams for with Power BI, pilots, collaboration, communication. Think about experiences where you don't want the user to have to leave Teams to go into Power BI, where you don't want them to, you want them to be chatting and they're used to doing the chat experience in Teams, or some are, whoever's using Teams already is. You can use that chat experience so you can talk about and collaborate, and you can add as tabs. So when you're doing report development across multiple people, you can potentially just chuck a group chat in, drop the tabs in and go, hey everyone, can you just do a quick scan of this report? Let me know about any gotchas you've got. And then you just remove the tabs and then you keep using it inside service. Good for a pilot, good for users. Now that we've gone through our Teams journey, we've collaborated away, let's take that board meeting to the next level and use PowerPoint. And you've probably already realized that throughout this entire presentation, we've been using the PowerPoint integration for Power BI this whole time, because you could see me editing and interfacing with some of those Power BI reports. You get two options when it comes to the Power BI integration. You can do a static one, or you can do the embedded live and do the interactive one. Both have their place, I think. And both of them, the first time Microsoft announced this, my first thought was data breaches. I know, weird thought, but I'm like, data breaches, how the heck am I going to know? And I still am looking into it. I'm like, how am I going to know if someone takes my Power BI report and embeds it in PowerPoint and then goes shares that PowerPoint with someone else? Like, what if that someone else doesn't have access to the data? What happens? And what if they do it statically? Is that considered a data breach if they just send that out somewhere? I don't know. Things to consider though, because these integrations do open up those sorts of conversations. But the first one is the static scenario. So if you're inside Power BI in the service, you're inside your report, you look at that export menu, you've now got the option for PowerPoint. In there, if I want the static one, it would be embed as image. So once I click the embed as image, I get the ability to say, hey, do you want the current report page? Do you want all report pages? Do you want the current values or something else? So think about that. The way I thought of using this feature is if I do a formal presentation to a board, or I do a monthly service desk ticket status report to our CAB board, or I might do a team meeting where I'm going to just, hey, everyone, this is the snapshot of how we went last month. I might want to do that static image, and I don't want to have to go through and grab all those figures and put them in a PowerPoint presentation. If Power BI can do it for me, or, more power to it. So I've picked my options. I'm going to say, you know what, I want to export every page because I'm about to give a board briefing. So I need it to all be in there. It then gives me the nice little, hey, spinny wheel. This is a more obvious spinny wheel, though, I must say. Spinny wheel with a pop-up that says, hey, leave it with me. I'll generate your PowerPoint and I'll tell you when it's done. Give it a few moments, and now I have my PowerPoint. So this here is a static screenshot. So if you imagine going in taking screen clippings, that's kind of what it's doing. It's taking static copies of all the pages as they were at the time I exported. And then the first page, which I'm not showing in the screenshots here, but that first page actually says which workspace this was generated from and what report I generated. One moment. Oh, I should have put mute. But anyway. So you can go in and see what workspace, what report, and now I've got my presentation for my board meeting. I don't need to go put in hours and hours to create a PowerPoint. I've already got all the information in my Power BI report, but I might want that snapshot for a formal briefing. I don't necessarily want it to change. I want to capture these points in time. And in this case, this is the customer profitability sample. So if you're wondering what this report comes from, it's one of the Power BI samples. Now let's talk about the dynamic one, the more live one. So this is where you're embedding the live data inside Power BI. So this is what I've done in this presentation for a lot of the previous demos. So we go in and we go to the same Power BI report and we say we're going to export it to PowerPoint with Embed Live. We then get a URL. From that URL, we go into PowerPoint, we pick Power BI. That'll ask us for the URL. We give it the URL, and ta-da! This is the interactive Power BI report. So if I start clicking around in here, I pick, how's Carlos going? Look, it's all interactive. It's all inclusive. I get the filter. Oh, back one. I get the filters pane. I get down the bottom. I can see where this report has come from. Oddly enough, the experience in service is that things like refresh and all that are up the top. Inside the embed, they're all at the bottom. So these are the options for refresh and reset. You can go in and take other actions, like you might want to learn more about Power BI, or you might want to hide your filters pane because it's taking up too much screen real estate. But it's all interactive, which is really cool. But think about that in terms of that's data sitting in a PowerPoint file. My scenarios then become static, sharing without access, does not allow refresh, formal documentation, versus dynamic, where it's repeatable, it answers that what if scenario. I can sit in a briefing, someone asks a question, and I can change the report to answer it. Like if I'm sitting in a briefing with my service desk staff saying, hey, how are our team members going? Let's look at how Carlos is going in our daily stand-ups. We can do those trend lines and see where that's at. And it's interactive. Great for a Q&A. Other integrations that I didn't cover today are things like Power Apps inside Teams. You can do Power Automate in Teams. You can do Visio in Power BI. Visio in Power BI is really fun. Like I did a floor plan, put that in Power BI, integrated it with data, and I could look and find out where colleagues were on the floor. It's great, especially when people come up to me and they're like, do you know where so-and-so sits? I'm like, hang on a minute. I've got the floor plan. I've got it in a Power BI report. I'll just click the filter and then it'll highlight exactly where they sit, and you can do the whole, you are here, you need to get to here. Some other considerations you need to take into account. If you've got siloed teams, like you might have a team that does Power BI, a separate team that does app development, a separate team that does Power Automate. If you've got to go across teams when you're working with integrations, be mindful of that. Environments, workspace change and release management. What am I talking about there? Power BI uses workspaces. Power Apps, Power Automate use environments. You've got to consider how are we going to manage the different scenarios and the different tooling, because I might want a UAT in a prod workspace for Power BI, but then I need a separate UAT and prod workspace for Power Automate, and how am I going to correctly cut that over when it comes to change and releasing between environments? Look at solutions when it comes to Power Apps and Power Automate, because you can export a solution and import it into another environment. And then licensing, always got to consider licensing, and it's going to be specific to your use case. Sometimes things like your Office 365 SKUs, like your E5s, will cover some of your licensing and not need you to get extras. In other cases, you're using premium functionality, premium connectors in Power Apps and Power Automate, or premium capacity settings inside Power BI. some references so you can look into this more yourself and have a bit of a play. And feedback. Hopefully there's a giant on the screen. I love feedback. So good, bad, or otherwise, you send me feedback. I love it. So, you don't like the fonts, you'd rather this be zoomed in, you need some magnified, you let me know. Or it wasn't what you were expecting compared to the abstract. I am more than happy to get any feedback, good, bad, or otherwise, because I love it. It means that I have something to make this better next time. Or you might think of scenarios that I haven't covered. Like you'd like to see the Visio integration. I love the Visio integration, so I'd be happy to demo that. Not today, because I don't have a demo ready, but have a look at that. And of course, thank you. Thank you from me to you. Um, I've just got a question coming up. Give me one moment because I've got to hold my phone to see the canopy to see if I can see the questions. Oh, I can hear myself back. I cannot see any questions on the canopy to answer from the cool Stream 17 behind the deck. You can't see this, but on Teams, I can see a message from the behind the scenes team to say, can I check questions? So getting back to it, I really want to say thank you both to the buddies in the orange shirts hanging out in the room. Thank you for attending this session. And I saw the little briefing at the start. Really appreciate it. Thank you to you, the attendees, for coming to this conference. You are what makes it what it is. You on top of the volunteers and organizers. Without having you attend, we can't have these events. And then I can't speak from the other side of the world, which is really cool. And thanks for seeing my session. I looked at what was on in this track. You got Connor, you got Michael Johnson talking about Power BI stuff. You got so many options, like it's super cool. So you can reach out to me on Twitter. Twitter is the best way to get to me a lot of the times. Go to my blog. It's not always up to date, very out of date at the moment, but check it out. Send me a message. If there's things you want to play with Power Automate and Power Apps and Power BI and the integrations and you're not sure how to do it, just drop me a line. I'll happily try and help you. Yes, I'm in Australia, but I go across multiple time zones. So it's not uncommon for me to be up at like 3 a.m. in the morning to watch like a Visual Studio launch or jump online to watch the future of Power BI visuals. So do drop me a line, and if I don't respond to ASAP or within a nice time frame, just message me on Twitter and go, did you see my email? Can you get back to me? That is everything I'm going to cover today. So if anyone has any questions, drop them in the Canopy app. Feel free to, wave and stuff in the audience because I do get a visual to see you all. I think there is a mic in the room to be able to ask questions. And hopefully, if you do have questions, do use that functionality, reach it. But in the event you can't, just reach out to me. That I am more than happy to. And I hope that lets you see some of the capabilities with those integrations. I know I didn't go into all the details of how to set it up. So if you do want to know some of those things, just let me know because there's some nuances around Power Apps environments. You got to make sure you pick the right environment when you drop the Power App visual onto the canvas. And there's other things when it comes to Power Automate. But yeah, did anyone have any questions? And apologies if I talk really fast. I have a habit of
Heidi,
doing that.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, it's Andy.
Yes, I
Sorry,
can.
for some reason I'm not sure what's happening with the Canopy app. We're publishing the
That's okay.
questions, but they're not actually coming up. So can I just ask a few in the time that we've got?
Yeah.
So Matt asked, you showed Power BI dashboards embedded in the model-driven app. Can Power BI scorecards and metrics be embedded?
Good question. Short answer, I don't know. I've not tried it. Metrics is a feature I've not got into. But to clarify, I did a Power BI visual tile inside a Power App Canvas app. The model app is slightly different. I'd have to double check actually. But yes, not sure.
Okay.
Sorry.
Martine asks, in the Power Automate example, should the flow not need a step to refresh the Power BI report before you send the email?
No. So in the Power Automate example, I'm not actually, in that example, when I'm sending in the example where I send the email, I'm doing an export of the report. So I don't need to change anything on the report itself. I'm just taking an export, sending it. If it's more around the, say, add 10% scenario where I might want to add the 10% and send an email, yes, I'd probably want to refresh it first, especially if I'm going to do multiple steps. Like if I go into that Power Automate and say, not only add 10%, but also refresh the visual and send and export and send an email. If I was going to do some chaining there, then yes. But with the one where my specific example where I sent an email, I was doing an export, so I didn't need to refresh in mine. But you could consider doing a refresh if that was needed.
Okay. Here's the one that I've got particular interest in. So Adam asks, can Power Automate be used to trigger an Azure Data Factory pipeline? Thinking of a scenario with a button in Power BI to allow users to trigger ETL from a source database to a reporting database.
Yes, and I've just remembered to repeat the question, but then I realized your mic is on the recording, so it's all good.
Yes.
I have not done that. So I'm thinking in my head, the triggers inside Azure Data Factory are trigger on a time frame. I don't think, off the top of my head, I can't remember if they have like a webhook trigger. If you had a webhook trigger, you can tell Power Automate to call webhooks and things. So as long as Azure Data Factory has the ability to be called by an external thing, API call, and authenticate, because authentication can always cause you problems, then yes, you could have Power Automate be a button on the Power BI side. So Power BI calls the Power Automate kicks off. From that, that's its trigger. From there, as long as Power Automate has the ability to interact with ADF, then yes, you could do that scenario. I can't remember the rest of all the question, but one thing to be mindful of with refreshing is think about that. I do it just one user hitting the button for a demo, and that's all well and good. But if you think about multiple users hitting that button and then multiple firing off, if your refresh cycle is not like super quick, it's going to cause you problems on your refreshes. So just be mindful of how you design in using refresh, just to cater for multiple users might be hitting that button.
So I think we're at time. There's a few more questions. So if anyone was asking questions, I think you said you were okay if people reached out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't see them in the Canopy app, so you will have to repeat them to me so that I can get them. But just drop me a line in Twitter. If you can't reach me there, jump on my blog. There's the contact me, just drop them in there. Or email me, heidi@heidihasting.com. That will send me an email direct. Any avenue you can find me on socials, just send me any questions you've got, and I'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. I can even send you the slides if that's what you're after.
There we go. I think that's time.
Thanks, everyone.